Okay, I want to discuss two mysteries with you. The first one is the John F. Kennedy assassination. Now, let me start by saying that I am not a conspiracy theorist. And I've read the books and seen the movies, and I don't believe any of this stuff that there was somebody other than Oswald and that there was two shooters in the grassy knoll. And none of that, none of those things have presented themselves with any actual evidence. But there is one thing that has always bothered me, and I'll tell you when it first bothered me. The first time, actually the only time I ever went to Dallas, and I wanted to see where Kennedy was assassinated. So I took my little car and I drove around, and I followed the route of his car. It was Caravan. And sure enough, I got off on Dealey Plaza, and I went all through Dealey Plaza, and I was able to keep a decent speed. And then you got to the end, and they had this kind of this wraparound thing where you had to make a sharp turn, and I had to slow down to almost nothing. Now, that's where Kennedy was shot, and he was in an open car in a Caravan, which means that his car essentially came to a stop at the only spot in that entire route where there was a guy sitting up there in an empty building with a gun, right above him. He couldn't miss. They say, he was a sharpshooter in the army or whatever he was. Anybody with a rifle sitting right there, basically right on top of it, could not have missed that shot. So who the heck made the decision to put that car going in that direction, and how did Oswald know that it would be coming to a direct stop right there at that book suppository, and how did he know to get in there with the rifle and wait for that car to come right to him? He didn't go to the car. It wasn't like, when Trump was giving his speech and some guy went there. This guy sat there and waited for the car, and that was not the original route. That thing's been pretty well established. So who changed it? Why? We've got names. I've done this research. Some people long since dead that did it, and apparently Larry O'Donnell signed off on the thing. That doesn't mean anything. These people sign off on things all the time. I'm sure he didn't pick that route, and I'm sure he wasn't responsible. Somebody told Oswald that was going to be the route, and somebody told Oswald to get a gun and sit up there, and somebody made that route, which would come to a stop in an open car. That was probably the only place Kennedy ever was in his entire presidency where he was wide open to a shot by an assassin. I was in Mexico and he went there. That car zipped along the Reformer. Nobody, and there was no place where anybody could have taken a shot at him. He traveled all over the world. Never was he in a position where he was a sitting duck. He was a sitting duck, and I cannot understand why there hasn't been more focus on that and more outreach about it. If everybody had to drive through Dealey Plaza the way I did, they would all say the same thing. What in the hell happened here? We know what happened there, but why did it happen like that? How did it happen? How was his car going at that location to almost a dead stop right in front of an empty building? Nobody even went to, somebody you think was somebody. Anybody would say, well, let me see. Along this route, there's one place where he could be in great danger, and that's right here at the end of Dealey Plaza. Is there any place where someone might be able to take a shot? Oh yeah, there's an empty building right there. How about if we go floor to floor and make sure there's nobody in that empty building? So unfortunately, my answer to this mystery is I don't know the answer. I will tell you this. Kennedy had a lot of people in the administration who didn't like him. The CIA was still run by the Dulles brothers. Remember John Foster Dulles, the guy who got us into Vietnam? Remember his brother, young Dulles, his baby brother, who was in charge of the CIA? He was in charge of the CIA. The people that, Trump talks about the deep state. Well, there really was a deep state. That when Kennedy came in, all those people and all those agencies were handpicked during the 8 years of the Eisenhower administration, and they were picked by the Dulles brothers. And then you had Curtis LeMay. And I'll never forget, Curtis LeMay was my father hated Curtis LeMay. You know why? Because my dad was a bombardier and advocate in World War II, and he really hated the idea of dropping bombs which could kill civilians. And unfortunately, they had to kill people. And my dad, told me he never killed anybody. Well, then I got a hold of his records after he died, and he did kill people. He would say, we killed a number of people in this bombing, and he was very sad about it. But these were people working in munitions factories and things that they had to bomb for the war effort. Curtis LeMay ordered the firebombing. You know what firebombing is? Firebombing is when they drop these bombs and they set fire to everything, and then they because of the heat differential, there's a wind that rushes through it and basically incinerates everybody in that town. He ordered the firebombing of Dresden, Germany. Dresden, Germany is where they make Dresden dolls, and that's all they made. The other thing they did was they housed some American prisoners, who I'm sure died during that bombing. So it was a terror campaign, just like he did the same thing in Japan, to terrorize the civilian population, so they would turn against their leaders. Now you can say maybe that was just an effective tactic. My dad never forgave Curtis LeMay for that. My entire time growing up, he really hated LeMay, and then I found out when I read LeMay's biography, there's another reason to hate LeMay. That's right, he went to Ohio State. There's not a Michigan grad alive today who has no reason to not detest Curtis LeMay for that reason alone. So there you had it. So Curtis LeMay, I remember this during the Cuban situation, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I learned a lot of these things through my dad. My dad was in the basement of Scott Air Force Base, a subground station which was the command center for our response to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Dad was right there in the middle of it. I tried to reach him. I was in college at the time, and I couldn't get through. And I found out later why, because he was incommunicado down in the underground control center. But I found out that Curtis LeMay was really mad at Kennedy because Kennedy refused to drop bombs on Cuba. It turned out later when Nikita Khrushchev's memoirs came out, and you should read those, he said that they had already given the order that if we were to bomb Cuba, that nuclear missiles would be leaving Russia and going to New York. No, not for vacation. They were going to New York to drop bombs on New York. Sometimes I wonder about you people. For crying out loud, Craig. No, they weren't going there for vacation. They were going there to bomb New York. No, that's not a musical. Okay, why do I even try? But in all seriousness, that's in Khrushchev's memoirs. That if we had dropped the bomb, like Curtis LeMay was demanding that Kennedy do it, he was like he tried to push Kennedy around. He was one of the many people who made the mistake of trying to push Kennedy around. They found out they couldn't. I believe without any evidence, therefore I don't strongly believe it, but I really suspect that this was a setup job. That it may have involved LeMay, it may have involved the Dulles brothers, it may have involved just people who worked for the Dulles brothers or people who worked for LeMay. But these people, I think, really believed that Kennedy was a threat to the country because he wasn't tough enough on the communists, and because he showed his weakness in their minds because he didn't get us into a nuclear war with Russia over Cuba. And I can't, no proof of that. It's just one of those things like they say, like on Bill Maher's, they have a thing that says, I don't know how I know it, I just know that. So I just know that there was somebody had to have put Kennedy in that position. And the odds that there's just coincidentally that this guy just happened to be sitting up there with a rifle saying, gee, maybe they'll come along this route, which there was no reason to go that route at all. It took them right off of the direct route where they were going. It took them right, the slow curve to get off of the road and go on this curve and get right back on the same road. No reason for it. When there's no reason for it, that usually means there is a reason for it. It's just not a legitimate one. So, unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that. I have the question. I will go to my grave, a day which is coming faster and faster. You're going to miss me when I'm gone. Yes, you will. Damn it. Someone's got to miss me. My dog sure as hell won't. Anyway, I don't even want to bring him into this conversation because, then the situation gets political. So, in any event, I don't have the answer to Kennedy, but I have the question, and I've never seen it addressed directly. All these others, they can easily dispute them and disprove them, the magic bullet and yada, yada, yada. But that one, why was Kennedy going in an open car to a place where he was going to come to a stop right in front of a building that was not inspected, where a guy was apparently the only person in that building, sitting there with his gun and his rifle in his lap, just waiting for Kennedy to be delivered? Who delivered it to him? How do you know he was going to be delivered? Why was that route taken? I wish I knew the answers, but I don't. I do, however, know the answers to a far more seemingly intractable and much longer existing mystery, and that is the mystery of Jesus Christ. And those of you who are religious, you may want to turn this off. Or you may want to turn it on so you can refute me later. But I've addressed this, I think, before, and it's a big question. And of course, lots of people have been asking this question. Lots of people investigate. Nobody seems to know the answer. And you know what I'm talking about. That's right. What did he do with all the money that he got from the wise men on the day he was born? I did a rough calculation, and you know my background is in math. I majored in physics. I minored in calculus. And a tough time with algebra, which is ironic because you can't do calculus without algebra. But I don't want to talk about my own difficulties growing up. But I'm pretty good with math, and I'm pretty good at creating mathematical models. That's what you really do most of in physics. So I did a mathematical model to figure out by today's dollars, how much did Jesus Christ get from the Magi, which is Spanish for sucker, from the Magi's who thought they were buying influence, what's his name, Elon Musk buying influence with Trump. That's what these Magi's figured they were doing with Jesus. They knew this guy was going to be he was going to be a comer. He was going to be he was going to be a Donald Trump. And so they brought him all this money. So I did a quick calculation, not quick, I spent some time with this, and I came up with American dollars. Jesus Christ netted $1.2 billion on the day he was born. $1.2 billion in American dollars. That's how much he got on the day he was born. Yet he died poverty-stricken. How the hell did that happen? Where did the money go? Was he a gambler? Maybe, but that's not the answer. Remember the loaves and the fishes? Remember the water into wine? Jesus was famous for his parties. He threw these extravagant parties all the time. And people say, because he never told anybody about this $1 billion+ that he had salted away. He said, how did you do it, Jesus? How are you coming up with all these loaves and fishes and vino? And he said, a miracle. I'm performing miracles. And remember all that water? And no, I don't even remember water. Well, if you did, you'd remember I turned the water into wine. That's where that wine came from. It was water, and I turned it into wine. The reality is you should have seen this guy's wine bill. And a lot of it wasn't just regular old, Middle Eastern, low-class wines. He had like French champagnes before there was a France. That takes some doing. That was a miracle. So he spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars on these parties. Why would he do that? Well, for a couple of reasons. One, he was an egomaniac. Two, he was not good with people. And so, he hung out with these wise men. There were like 12 of these guys. They were a little bit strange, if you know what I mean. But Jesus and these wives, they were the only friends he had. Of course, he paid for everything that they wanted, every place they went. He even one point, get this, he went out and told these people that he walked on water, and they believed him. And what he really did, he has one of these cameras that was, with the CGI, and it made it look like he was walking on water. And of course, he wasn't. He was walking past a screen that had pictures of water. But they believed anything he said. Why? Because they got to hang with this guy who took them everywhere and treated him to everything. Whatever they wanted, they got it. He paid for it. So eventually, he ran out of money. And as I told you, he wasn't really good with people. When he ran out of money, they turned against him. Everybody turned against him, even his gang. And the next thing you know, they do what anybody does, who's, like somebody takes you along, they treat you, they give you this, they give you, then the money runs out, what do? You turn on him. They turned on him with a vengeance. So that's what happened. That's the story of Jesus. The big thing is, you wanted to know what happened to the money, that's where the money went. All those parties. So, one mystery I couldn't answer, but the second mystery I did answer. Now, the third mystery, of course, is how the hell did Donald Trump get elected President of the United States? And then I don't have a clue. I wish I did. I really wish I did. I'll go to my grave not knowing the answer to that one. Unbelievable. Okay, that's enough of that nonsense. I'll talk to you next time I see you. Bye.